What are we fighting for, brothers? We're fighting for a righteous world. 2 Peter 3:13. We're fighting for a world of total righteousness. We're fighting for a world where we're going to be exalted, where we're going to be lauded, where we're going to be praised as the people of the Most High, as the Israelites, as the elect of the nation of Israel. Think about that, man. The elect of the nation of Israel, part of the 144,000. Think about that. Huh? That alone should inspire you. There's even a song, man. Oh, when the saints come marching in. We're those saints that's going to come marching in. Oh, I want to be in that number. We're in that number. We believe that according to faith. Come on, brothers.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shah, Bahasham, Rakakwadash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers. And peace and blessings, salutations to the hopeful lake out there pushing his word and truth and in sincerity across the four winds. In the name of Yahweh Bashim Shai, pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful lake, the listeners whom have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashim Shai. All right, and what I want to get into today is a continuation of the book of Acts. You know, we made to the 9th chapter, you know, and this is one of, you know, the most famous chapters in the books of Acts, you know, the road to Damascus. All right, which, you know, this is when the Apostle Paul, you know, has his conversion, you know, as he on the way to Damascus, all right, and he is met by Yahweh Shai, okay, and that experience, you know, will change his course, okay, because as we know, the Apostle Paul, you know, became a persecutor of the church. You know, Apostle Paul, you know, he was like a bounty hunter, you know, for the believers of Yahweh Shai. You know, so similar like you would say a U.S. Marshal. You know, he was he was dedicated. Okay, he had tasked himself. All right, with rounding up, you know, believers and bringing them, you know, to Jerusalem bound in chains. Okay, causing some to even be put to death. Okay, so this is, you know, the road to Damascus, in which even when you get that saying, you know, they have that saying in the world, you know, a road to Damascus moment. Okay. So when you go, just real quick, look up in the chat, It said, does the term road to Damascus mean someone has completely changed their life? Okay, which in this truth, we all can go back to our road to Damascus moment, when we began to be converted in this truth. It changed our whole trajectory on the path that we was going. It says, yes, the road to Damascus is commonly used to mean that someone has undergone a sudden, profound change in beliefs, values, or direction in life. Okay? And that's our awakening to the truth, man. The truth requires a profound change in beliefs and values and direction in life. Okay? Because me personally speaking, I know when because I found out I was the truth. I found out about the truth, from a brother whose son I was coaching in little league football, and on the way to a game, you know, uh, he began to go into scriptures, okay, and then a few weeks later, we had went to a game in Memphis, from Jackson, and the whole time, all the way from Jackson to Memphis was about 3 hours, especially on the bus. But we just going into the scriptures, okay? And on the way back from Memphis to Jackson, we just going into the scriptures. And by the time I got back to Jackson, you know, I had a completely different belief system, completely different values, and the direction of my life, drastically changed. I was heavy into the church, part of different ministries in the church, heavy into the church. Uh, we had just had a Christmas party at the house, because this was in December, you know, and uh, I said I was still coaching, and just had my mindset just on being this super Christian in Babylon, and coaching football forever, okay, trying to help the community, and Jake say, you know, and by the time I got home, it caused me to start looking into some things based off the experience I had with the brother, the brother Eliashama. And uh yeah, so in December, we just had a Christmas party, but by January, so we were throwing the Christmas tree in the dumpster, you know, just to make a long story short, and then so forth, so on, you begin to put off, you stop going to church, you know, and it was just a complete change. It was a profound change. It was a shock to, the family and friends and church members, okay? But it was like into a road to Damascus moment, and I know you brothers, all right, all have testimony, dealing with their road to Damascus moment, you know? And it says, just going into it, said the order, said the phrase comes from the Bible, Acts 9, Saul, a fierce persecutor of Christians or believers, I say followers of Yahweh, all right, because they just use that term Christian, well, ultimately the followers of Yahweh, Israelites that follow Yahweh, whether the circumcision or Israelite foreigners, okay? When they say Christian, these are Israelites that follow Yahweh. It says, was traveling to Damascus when he experienced a dramatic vision of Yahweh, which wasn't a vision, he actually seen Yahweh. After this event, he completely changed his life, became a believer, and is later known as the Apostle Paul. Meaning in modern usage today, a road to Damascus moment usually implies a sudden awakening or realization, a complete reversal of views or behavior, often moral, spiritual, and ideological in nature. Okay, so even I'm saying in the world, your turn road to Damascus, goes into a drastic transformation, a sudden awakening realization, and we all can go back to that moment, to where we began that drastic transformation into the truth. Okay, it usually suggests the change was dramatic, unexpected, because it wasn't planned, because we all had our own thing going, our own plans, our own ambitions, what we thought living was, what we thought life was. Okay, it said unexpected transformational, not just a gradual shift. So, yes, when people use a phrase, they generally mean someone has fundamentally changed their lives or beliefs, often in a striking or revelatory way. Okay, and we all have their testimony, because the truth requires, a drastic transformation, as we become renewed in everything. They're born again. All right, process, man. Okay, so let's go here to the book of Acts, chapter 9, verse 1. Just want to get into that before we went into it. But this is Acts chapter 9, verse 1. And the NLT says, meanwhile, Saul was uttering threats with every breath and was eager to kill the Lord's followers. So he went to the high priest, so he was hard body against the church, man, you know. And it says he requested letters addressed to the synagogues in Damascus asking for their cooperation in the arrest of any followers on the way he found there. He wanted to bring them, both men and women, back to Jerusalem in chains. He was approaching Damascus on, so pretty much like a warrant. He wanted to get like a warrant. They would give him the authority, to round up believers. And it said both men and women. So Paul, you see, Paul, he thought he was doing the right thing. He thought that the believers were blaspheming the Most High. Because that was the doctrine of the Sanhedrin. These believers of this Yahweh, okay, are blaspheming the Most High. Okay, as Apostle Paul, he grew up around, the Sanhedrin synagogue. Okay, and it says that he was approaching Damascus on this mission. A light from heaven suddenly shone down around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Who are you? Saul asked, and the voice replied, I am Yahweh Shai, the one you are persecuting. And as we go later, down into the book of Acts, it lets you know that he said this in the Hebrew tongue. Aparazah, when we get to it, we're gonna go into the name. Okay. Somebody recently asked uh Elder Apostle Gabar, about how did we come up with the name. Well, it's in the scriptures, man. The name is clearly the name of the Son and the Father is in the scriptures. Okay. It says, now get up. Matter of fact, as I said, I gotta show it. So let's go here real quick. All right. It's just gonna be a quick, but or rather later on we'll pull up the actual later on down the line in this book we'll pull up the Hebrew characters, okay, and translate it. Well, you go into this Greek word is Iesus, okay, but it has a Hebrew origin. If you go into it, all right, now the spelling right here is off, which is Yahweh Shaya, all right, Yahweh Shaya, okay. Well, that's it's an extra letter in it. But when you go to the root word in the etymology, okay, well you got the name of the Father here, which is Yahweh, all right, Yahweh. So you got the name of the Father here, okay, which is both names, okay, Yahweh, okay, that's the name. You got the Yah like a floating seven, okay. Then you have like this backwards N is a ha, okay, and then you have this like a longer number seven. This character, okay, is the ha. I mean, is the wa. Salak is the wa. Okay. Then you have the ha again, which it doesn't make. All right. The full ha sound is Yahweh. All right. Yahweh. Okay. Which he is. Okay, and you go here where it says Jehovah, said the existing one, but then it goes in what to the proper name of the true power, Yahweh. All right, he exists. Okay, so it clearly has his name, okay, in the Syrian Hebrew, Yahweh. All right, those four characters make up the Lord's name, the Heavenly Father's name, Yahweh. Okay, then you go right here, okay, to the Strong's, okay, you see the name clearly of Yah, Ha, Wa, Shah. Okay, you got the floating seven, you know, it's the Yah sound. Okay, you got this Ian looking character. All right, the Ha, the longer seven. Okay, the narrow seven. Okay, Yah, Ha, Wa, that's the Wa. And you got this W looking character, which is the Shah. All right, and then you have this Y looking character, which is the I. Yah, Ha, Wa, Shah. Okay, Yah, Ha, Wa, Shah. Okay, so those names are clearly in the scriptures. You see, the Heavenly Father name Yahweh and His Son's name Yahweh. Okay, Yahweh. Okay, He delivers. Okay, Yahweh goes into deliverance and salvation. Yah is He. He's our deliverer. He's our salvation, man. Okay, His name is a what? A Omen Nomen. All right, He was born in the Spirit to deliver. Okay, real quick, you know. Jake playing, and and if you don't believe we have the Hebrew, cool. You believe we don't have the Hebrew, you believe we don't have the name. Okay, well just jump into Jacob trouble like that. Just hey, take off full speed into Jacob trouble without the name. Okay, and it says Matthew 1:21, and she shall have a son, and she will have a son, and you are to name him Yahweh, for he will save his people from their sins. Okay? He will save his people from their sins. All right? So his name expresses his purpose. He delivers, he saves. Okay? It was in the time of great deliverance. First we had to be delivered from sin. All right? We have a sacrifice that delivers us from the condemnation of sin. Okay? And then he's going to come and physically deliver us, all right, from this destruction that's to come. Okay? So I just wanted to get into that. Like if you believe, all right, you don't. That's on you, man. We fully believe we have the name. We fully believe we have the Hebrew. We fully persuaded. Okay. It says, now get up and go into the city. It's back in Acts 9:6. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Then it says the men with Saul stood speechless, for they heard the sound of someone's voice, but saw no one. Okay. So Yahweh appears, okay, to Apostle Saul. All right, well, Saul, which was going to become Apostle Paul, he appears to him in the chariot. Okay, and it was like he seen that great light. Okay, with the light of the chariot. Okay, and he got off his horse. You see, and began to dialogue. Okay, verse 6 said, now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. So he's getting his marching orders from Yahweh. Then it said the men with Saul stood speechless, for they heard the sound of someone's voice, but saw no one. Saul picked up himself off the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he was blind. So his companions led him by the hand to Damascus. He remained there blind for 3 days and did not eat or drink. The light, blinded him, man. Okay, and it's also going to him receiving, renewed vision. Like us, we was given back our sight when we came into the truth, because we were blind in this world. Okay, but the truth gave us back, our sight in the spirit. Okay, though you once knew this. Okay, verse 10 it said, now there was a believer in Damascus named Ananias. The Lord spoke to him in a vision, calling Ananias. Yes, Lord, he replied. The Lord said, go over to Straight Street to the house of Judas. When you get there, ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul. He is praying to me right now. I have shown him a vision of a man named Ananias coming in and laying hands on him so he can see again. What the Lord exclaimed, but the Lord exclaimed, Ananias, I have heard many talk about the terrible things this man has done to believers in Jerusalem. So Paul had a reputation. When he was Saul, he had a reputation, okay, of his brutality towards the church, man. His zealous, okay, hatred towards the church. You see, so in the night is like, man, this guy, you know, and it says, reading on said, and he is authorized by the leading priest to arrest anyone who calls upon your name. But the Lord said, go, for Saul is my chosen instrument to take my message to the Gentiles and to the kings, as well as to the people of Israel, and I will show him how much he must suffer for my name's sake. Okay? So here it is, Yahweh Shai himself is vouching for the Apostle Paul. Okay? But a nigga in the snapback eating Taco Bell, Paul ain't qualified. The Apostle Paul is not qualified, man. Okay? And these are your leaders, man. All right? Good luck to you niggas, man. And it says, so Ananias went and found Saul. He laid his hands on him and said, Brother Saul, the Lord Yahushua, who appeared to you on the road, has sent me so that you might regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Instantly, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he regained his sight. Then he got up and was baptized. Okay, so he had that new outlook. You know, he went through that transformation. He began to go through that transformation. Okay, because the truth gives us a new outlook. It gives us a new vision. Okay, it gives us that clarity. Okay, and so afterward he ate some food and regained his strength. Saul stayed with the believers in Damascus for a few days, and immediately he began preaching about Yahushua in the synagogue, saying, He is indeed the Son of the Most High. So now the Spirit is heavy on Paul, just to teach and go into Yahushua. He fully believes. Okay? So he was just, hard bodied against the truth, but show the power of the Lord. Now he's hard bodied for the truth, man. And the Lord does, these things in an unorthodox way. Okay, to show his power, to show that he is, man. Okay, so this man that was, once so, gung ho, okay, when it came to persecuting the church, okay, is now on the front lines of the ministry, man. Okay, and everything that we was doing, in our day to day, man, we was rebelling, we was kicking against the pricks. Like I said, celebrating Christmas, that's rebellion. Eating what we wanted to eat, doing what we wanted to do. Okay, all into this society, and looking at America as righteous and just doing what we wanted to do. Okay, we was in rebellion. Okay, but the Wali Al Bashim Shah, he reversed their rebellion, man. Okay, and Apostle Paul, he had an office. You see, the Lord said, "What the Apostle Paul will be an instrument." All right, and Apostle Paul, he stepped into his office, man, as we are all to do. When you go to Romans 11 and 13. Look at this in the KJV. This is Romans 11 and 13 said, For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my office. Okay, I magnify my office. You see, so Apostle Paul, he fully understood, that he was an instrument, and he understood, later that his office was to the Israelite foreigners because he dealt with Jake in Jerusalem. Okay, then he understood that his office was amongst the Israelite foreigners, man. When Yahweh Shai told him he was going to be an instrument to go before, Jerusalem, the Gentiles, the kings. He would be brought before, certain kings and nobles and even Caesar. Okay, all with the testimony of Yahweh Shai. Okay, so Apostle Paul, he stepped into his office. And when you go here to First Corinthians chapter 9, and this is what we're all called to do, as we have a renewed outlook. Okay, the Lord guides us to what our office, man, our assignment in his ministry. Okay, First Corinthians 9:16. For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of, for necessity is laid up upon me. Yeah, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. Okay, so there's a necessity when it was necessary. Okay, because we have nothing to glory, because this is what we're assigned to do. We're doing our assignment. Okay, so we're not here to exalt ourselves. The glory goes to Yahweh Bashem Al Shai. Okay, the glory of everything we're doing is this word coming to pass, man. The power of the Lord being shown in the earth. Okay, we're the messengers. Okay, of a great power, and His Son Yahweh Shai. Right, we're the forerunners. Okay, He's coming with all the glory. Verse 17, for if I do this thing willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, a dispensation of the gospel is committed unto me. Okay, a dispensation. Let's go to the word dispensation. All right, in the Greek.
Strong's G 3622. Oikonomia.
Economy.
Oikonomia.
We'll probably get that word economy from. Okay, so the management of a household or household affairs, man. Okay, the house of David, the elect. And each brother has been given, office within his household to manage the household affairs of Yahushua. Okay, it says specifically the management, oversight, administration of others' property, because the elect are the property of Yahushua. In which we've been given, the task to manage the oversight, okay, of the Lord's property, man, which is the church, the believers. The office of a manager or overseer, stewardship, administration, dispensation. Okay, administration and dispensation, man. So we all been given a dispensation of, okay, the gospel, man, of the good news of the church, of the house of faith, man. Okay, it's committed unto us. Okay, and Apostle Paul's an example of stepping into, fully stepping into that office. So this going back to the book of Acts chapter 9 and verse 21, it says, but all that heard him were amazed and said, is this not he that destroyed them which called on this name in Jerusalem, and came hither for that intent, that he might bring them bound unto the chief priest? So it was a Paul was the talk of the community, man. He was the talk of the church amongst the believers, man, amongst the community of believers. Okay, Paul had became the talk because they knew how hard he went against the church. So now for him to make this radical change, people were taken back. The church was taken back. You see, it says Saul preaching became more and more powerful, and the Jews in Damascus couldn't refuse his proof that Yahweh Shah was indeed the Messiah. So Paul was going in. Okay, it says, and after a while, some of the Jews plotted together to kill him. Okay, so immediately he began to receive hatred Okay, for the sake of Yahweh, what Yahweh said, you're gonna suffer things for my name. Okay, you're gonna be an instrument. You're gonna have a mighty office. Okay, and say Apostle Paul when he was getting down, they couldn't rebuttal. Okay, and you know how the Apostle Paul, he goes, gets to pulling them precepts, making them analogies, and you know, you see, and they couldn't rebuttal. And what did Jake always do? That's kill him. What Jake immediately go to. Okay, verse 24 said they were watching for him day and night at the city gate so they could murder him, but Saul was told about their plot. So during the night, some of the other believers lowered him in a large basket through an opening in the city wall. When Saul arrived in Jerusalem, he tried to meet with the believers, but they were all afraid of him. They did not believe he had truly become a believer. So Jake like it's a setup. Jake, they were skeptical, man. Like, this is a setup, man. Ain't no way he teaching. It's one thing they say he was a believer, but now he just this super duper teacher in Yahweh, and he was just, you know. So Saul stayed with the apostles and went all around Jerusalem with them, preaching boldly in the name of the Lord. He debated with some Greek speaking Jews. All right, going back to Greek speaking Jews, showing you that those Greeks, okay, the New Testament Israelites, man. Okay, Hellenized Israelites, man. It says, but they tried to murder him. When the believers had heard about this, they took him down to Caesarea and sent him away to Tarsus, his hometown. The church then had peace throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria, and it became stronger as the believers lived in the fear of the Lord, and with the encouragement of the Holy Spirit, it also grew in numbers. So the church was just constantly growing. Meanwhile, Peter traveled from place to place, and he came down to visit the believers in the town of Lydda. There he met a man named uh, Aeneas, who had been paralyzed and bedridden for 8 years. Peter said, Ananias, Yahushua, Hamashiach heals you. Get up and roll up your sleeping mat, and he was healed immediately, man. There's power in that name. Okay? Esau ain't got that, man. Esau gotta have this big ass data center, big ass lab. They gotta cut you open. Okay? Your spine all you on the table, your spine all exposed, and they got your back open, your skull, just for you to be partially healed, and then this nigga jump up and down like he, all right, some great wonder, man. Okay, that nigga Esau fraud, man, the biggest fraud to ever do it, and that nigga Esau, man. Okay, and I'm that nigga biggest hater this year, man. Going forward, okay, I'm getting, like them Jakes don't give you no credit no matter what you done. I'm that nigga for Esau, man. No matter how great you is, Jake always, you see, I'm in that spirit towards Esau, man. Okay, goddamn fraud. You see, he said, then the whole population of Lydda and Sharon was Ananias walking around, and they turned to the Lord. There was it said, then the whole population of Lydda and Sharon saw Ananias walking around. They turned to the Lord. And see, these miracles are all about forwarding Yahweh. Okay, it wasn't about forwarding Peter. Okay, and what he had going on, the Apostle Peter, and what he had going on, it was about forwarding. All right, Yahweh. Okay, there was a showcase that their power is real. Okay, we're not serving, some, feeble, okay, power. Nah, man, the Lord gave the apostles the power to for the sake of the church, man. Okay, for the believer's sake, So you had the whole population, converted to Yahweh this town, this city, man. Okay, it said there was a believer in Joppa named Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was always doing kind things for others and helping the poor. About this time, she became ill and died. Her body was washed for burial and laid in the upstairs room. But the believers had heard that Peter was nearby and littered, so they went. So they sent two men to beg him, please come as soon as possible, man. And this showed their faith, man. In Yahweh Shema Shah, because they knew the Lord was dealing with Peter. Okay, so it shows their faith that they sent for him. And see, we see the same thing. Yahweh Shah, he will heal those that believe. All right, because the fact that they believe he could do it, they provoked him to heal. So the fact that they believe, that through the Apostle Peter, that Yahweh Shema Shah can do it. All right, that's the atmosphere for the Lord to work a miracle. So Peter returned with them. As soon as he arrived, they took him to the upstairs room. The room was filled with widows who were weeping and showing him the coats of the other clothes Dorcas had made for them. But Peter asked them all to leave the room. Then he knelt and prayed. Turning to the body, he said, "Get up, Tabitha." And she opened her eyes. When she saw Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then he called in the widows and all the believers, and he presented her to them alive. The news spread throughout the town, and many believed in the Lord, man. Okay, it was all about everything we do is about forwarding Yahweh Bashim Shai. It's not for us, it's not for our glory. Okay, it's all about the glory of Yahweh Bashim Shai and his power and his gospel being forwarded, man. Okay, the good news is doctrine, man. It says, and Peter stayed a long time in Joppa, living with Simon, all right, with Simon, like a tanner, okay, of hides. Okay. So that concludes that chapter, you know. I wanted to get into it. So Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you sisters edified once again. I'm gonna give all praise and glory unto Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, Bahashem Kakadash. And double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS, who rule well, teach well, being good examples towards younger brothers. And peace and blessing salutations, hopefully, Shalom.